Welcome to Caveman Stories, where we journey together through the mists of time to discover the extraordinary moments that shaped human civilization. Tonight, we travel back nearly 2 million years to witness humanity's most transformative discovery, the mastery of fire. From the first terrifying encounters with wild flame to the sacred guardians who kept civilization's light alive through endless nights, this is the epic story of how our ancestors conquered darkness itself. Join us as we explore 20 chapters of humanity's greatest adventure, from creatures cowering in frozen caves to the fire keepers whose flames still burn in every light that illuminates our modern world. If you're ready to walk with our ancestors through their greatest triumph, subscribe to Caveman Stories and let the journey begin. Don't forget to hit that like button to help others discover these ancient tales that live within us all. Close your eyes and travel with me, back through the mists of time, back beyond memory, beyond the first written word, beyond the first planted seed. We are journeying to a world sculpted by ice, where our ancestors faced darkness that stretched like an ocean across months of winter. Here, in the grip of the Pleistocene, humanity learned its first lessons about survival, about fear, and about the precious gift of light. Picture the Earth as it was over 1 million years ago. Vast glaciers, thick as mountains, creep southward like frozen rivers, grinding continents beneath their weight. The world our early ancestors knew was not the gentle Earth of today. It was a planet locked in ice, where winter nights could swallow 4 months whole, where the sun became a stranger, appearing briefly on the horizon before vanishing again into an endless twilight. In what we now call Europe and Northern Asia, small bands of early humans, our distant kin, Homo erectus, huddle in caves carved by wind and water. Feel the bite of air that never warms. Taste the metallic sharpness of snow that falls and falls until it buries the world in silence. These caves, these shelters of stone, become entire universes during the months of darkness. The entrance yawns like a mouth, breathing out the cold that seeps into bone and marrow. Imagine waking in such a world. Your eyes open to black stone above, black stone around. Outside, the wind carries the howl of creatures that hunt in darkness. Wolves with eyes like amber flames, cave lions whose breath steams in the frigid air. But it is not just the cold that weighs upon the human spirit during these endless nights. It is the silence between the wind, the way darkness seems to press against your skin, the feeling that the sun has abandoned the world forever. Our ancestors felt this weight in ways we can barely comprehend today. Without artificial light, without the promise of a switch to banish darkness, they lived at the mercy of natural rhythms that could stretch human endurance to its breaking point. Archaeological evidence from sites like Cavemen Cave in Israel and Wonderwork Cave in South Africa shows us layers of ash, generations of human occupation, telling us that even our earliest relatives understood the cave as sanctuary, not just from weather, but from the psychological burden of endless night. Feel how their minds adapted to this darkness. Listen to the way they learned to mark time by the movement of stars visible through the cave mouth, how they developed an intimate relationship with the phases of the moon. When the winter solstice arrived, though they had no name for it, they could sense in their bones that something was shifting, that the longest night had passed, though weeks of darkness still stretched ahead. In these caves, families pressed together for warmth, sharing breath, sharing heartbeat. Children who had never seen summer learned stories of warmth from elders who remembered. The act of storytelling became a form of survival, a way to keep hope alive when the world outside seemed dead. They told tales of the return of light, of times when the ice would retreat, when herds would follow the melting edge northward, bringing life back to the frozen world. The psychological toll was immense. Modern sleep research tells us that prolonged darkness triggers changes in the human brain, increases in melatonin that can lead to depression, disruptions in circadian rhythms that affect everything from appetite to emotional regulation. Our Ice Age ancestors felt this burden in their bodies, in the way their spirits seemed to shrink along with the shortened days. Yet they endured. They developed rituals to mark the passage of time, scratching marks on bone and stone, creating the first calendars. They learned to read the subtle changes in light that told them dawn was coming, even when dawn brought only a brief gray gleam before darkness returned. They discovered that survival was not just about finding food or staying warm, it was about maintaining the human spirit when the world seemed to offer no hope. In the depths of these caves, pressed against cold stone, our ancestors learned something profound about what it means to be human. They learned that we are creatures of light, that our souls require more than mere physical survival. They learned to create meaning in darkness, to find beauty in the smallest changes, the way ice crystals formed on cave walls, the patterns stars made as they wheeled overhead, the comfort found in the simple act of breathing together, staying alive together through the longest nights our species has ever known. This is where our story begins, in that primordial darkness, where humanity first began its ancient dance with light and shadow, where the seeds of all our future discoveries were planted in the fertile soil of necessity and hope. Our ancestors knew that nightfall brought more than cold. It awakened a world of predators for whom humans were nothing more than slow, soft prey wandering too far from safety. Listen to the sounds that filled those endless nights. Beyond the cave mouth, where firelight had not yet learned to dance, the darkness rustled with life that hunted. The cough of a cave lion echoes off stone walls, a sound like thunder wrapped in velvet, announcing the presence of a killer whose shoulders stood higher than a human's chest. Fossil evidence from sites across Europe tells us these magnificent beasts, Panthera spelea, shared the landscape with our ancestors, their massive canine teeth capable of crushing bone with the casual ease of cracking nuts. Feel how the human ear, evolved for survival, amplifies every sound in darkness. That distant snap of a twig becomes the footfall of something massive. The rustle of wind through dry grass transforms into the whisper of a stalking predator. Modern neuroscience reveals why our ancestors' hearts hammered in their chests during these night watches. The human brain, deprived of visual input, heightens all other senses until the world becomes a symphony of potential threats. In the caves of Atapuerca in Spain, archaeologists have uncovered the gnawed bones of early humans, tooth marks telling stories of nights when the hunters became the hunted. Hyenas, with jaws powerful enough to crack elephant bones, lurked in the shadows beyond human refuges. Their haunting calls, part laugh, part scream, carried for miles through the frozen air, a sound that spoke of death and carrion, of things that fed on failure and fear. But it was the wolves that truly understood the human heart. Canis lupus, in packs of 20 or more, moved through the Ice Age landscape like gray ghosts. They were intelligent in ways that terrified our ancestors, capable of strategy, of patience, of waiting. Archaeological evidence from Boxgrove in England shows us wolf teeth scattered among human tools, telling us that these predators and our ancestors competed for the same caves, the same shelters, the same chance at survival through the bitter months. Picture a family huddled in their stone sanctuary, listening to the scratch of claws on rock outside. Wolves testing the boundaries of human space, circling just beyond the reach of thrown stones. The adults take turns staying awake because sleep meant death, because relaxing vigilance for even a moment could mean waking to yellow eyes and bared fangs. Children learned fear before they learned language. They absorbed terror through their mothers' quickened heartbeats, through the way conversations stopped when certain sounds echoed from the darkness. The fear of the dark became encoded in human DNA during these nights, passed down through generations until even today, safe in our lit homes, some primitive part of our brain still listens for the padding of hunting feet. Yet this fear forged something beautiful in the human spirit. Pressed together by terror, families discovered the profound comfort of shared vigilance. They learned that survival was not a solitary act, but a communal one. The person who stayed awake while others slept became humanity's first guardian, our first protector. They developed signals, soft whistles, gentle touches, ways to communicate danger without alerting the predators that prowled just beyond their refuge. The darkness taught them to read the night like a language. They learned that certain bird calls meant wolves were moving through the valley below. They discovered that the quality of silence could tell them whether a cave bear had claimed a neighboring shelter. Their ears became instruments of survival, capable of distinguishing between the whisper of wind and the whisper of death approaching on padded feet. In the deepest hours of night, when even the predators seemed to pause in their hunting, our ancestors would press their children close and whisper the first lullabies, not songs of comfort, but instructions for survival, disguised as melodies. Stay quiet, stay still, stay close to the warmth of the family. These were not just words, but sacred knowledge. The difference between seeing another dawn and becoming scattered bones on the cave floor. This nightly dance with death and darkness shaped more than survival instincts. It created the first human understanding of courage, not the absence of fear, but the choice to face fear together, to stand guard while others slept, to place the safety of the group above the terror that clawed at individual hearts. Fire was not humanity's invention, it was nature's gift, violent and beautiful, offered in moments of chaos that would forever change the relationship between humans and darkness. Picture the scene, a summer storm building over the African savanna, where our earliest relatives foraged for roots and hunted small game. The air grows heavy, electric with potential. Lightning splits the sky like cracks in heaven itself, and where it touches the dry grass, something miraculous blooms, bright tongues of orange and gold that dance and leap, consuming the world in waves of light and heat. Our ancestors had no words for what they witnessed. They could only watch in wonder and terror as fire raced across the landscape, transforming everything it touched. The smell reached them first, acrid smoke mixed with the scent of burning plants, a smell that would become associated with both destruction and transformation. Then came the heat, waves of warmth that could be felt from impossible distances, making the air itself shimmer and dance. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chesawanja in Kenya tells us this story through layers of burned earth and reddened clay. Here, nearly 2 million years ago, early hominids encountered fire in its natural state. The evidence lies in the soil itself, patches of oxidized earth that speak of temperatures hot enough to change the very chemistry of stone and clay. These were not controlled fires, but wild ones, nature's own demonstrations of power. Imagine the courage it took to approach these blazing landscapes after the flames had passed. The ground still radiated heat, and wisps of smoke rose from charred logs like the breath of some sleeping dragon. But among the ash and devastation, our ancestors made a discovery that would echo through millions of years. The burned remains of animals, creatures caught and cooked by the wildfire, gave off scents that made their mouths water in ways they had never experienced. The meat was different. Where fire had touched it, the tough fibers had become tender, the flavors concentrated and rich. Without understanding why, our ancestors had discovered cooking, the process that would help grow their brains and shape their evolution. They learned to search the burned areas for these prizes, competing with scavengers for flesh that fire had prepared. But the most precious discovery was not the cooked meat. It was the glowing coals that remained long after the flames had died. Deep within piles of ash, embers pulsed like tiny suns, holding within their orange hearts the secret of fire itself. These coals could live for hours, sometimes days, breathing slowly but steadily, waiting. Watch as the first brave soul reaches toward these glowing remnants with a stick. The wood catches, flame blooms along its length, and suddenly humanity holds its first torch. The terror and wonder in those ancient eyes as they realize they carry a piece of the sun in their hands. This moment changes everything. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, a creature has captured light itself. The myths that would grow from these encounters run deeper than stories. They became the foundation of human spiritual understanding. From Prometheus stealing fire from the gods to the Aboriginal Australian stories of how fire came to humans, every culture on Earth has preserved the memory of this moment when we first claimed the power that separated us from all other creatures. In the caves of Cavemen in Israel, evidence dating back 400,000 years shows us how our ancestors learned to preserve these precious embers. Layers of carefully arranged stone hearths tell us they discovered that fire could be kept alive, fed, tended like a living thing. They learned that certain materials, dry grass, thin twigs, pieces of bark, could coax flames from the smallest spark. But keeping fire alive required more than knowledge. It required devotion. Someone had to watch over the coals, to feed them, to protect them from wind and rain. Fire became humanity's first responsibility outside of basic survival. It transformed nomadic bands into communities with a shared sacred duty, keeping the light alive through the dark hours of night. The first firekeepers emerged from these early groups, individuals who showed a special aptitude for understanding fire's moods and needs. They learned that fire was like a temperamental creature that required constant attention. Too much fuel would smother it, too little would let it die. Wind could be friend or enemy depending on its strength. Rain was always a mortal threat. These early encounters with fire planted the seeds of all human technology, all human civilization. In learning to preserve and tend flame, our ancestors took their first steps toward mastering the forces of nature rather than merely surviving them. The darkness that had once seemed absolute now had an enemy, a bright companion that would stand guard through the longest nights and transform the caves of stone into the first human homes. Picture that moment when flame first danced in the mouth of a cave, casting long shadows that pushed back more than darkness. They pushed back death itself. The transformation was immediate and miraculous. Where once the cave mouth had been a portal through which terror could enter, now it blazed with protective light. The flames, fed with carefully gathered wood and tended with trembling hands, created the first barrier humans had ever built against the predators that ruled the night. Archaeological evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa shows us ash layers dating back over 1 million years, telling us this moment, when humans first brought fire into their shelters, marked the beginning of our species' true dominance over the natural world. Feel the heat radiating from that first hearth as it pushes against the cold stone walls. The temperature inside the cave rises, and for the first time in human memory, our ancestors removed the animal skins they've clutched around their shoulders. Their children, born into a world where warmth was always scarce, stretch their small hands toward the flames and discover what comfort truly means. The fire doesn't just heat their bodies, it warms something deeper, some part of the human soul that had been frozen by fear and cold. But the most profound change happens outside the cave, in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. Listen to the night sounds transform. The confident padding of hunting cats becomes hesitant, uncertain. Wolves that once circled human shelters with the patience of certain death now pace at a distance, their yellow eyes reflecting the flames but coming no closer. For millennia, predators had relied on darkness as their ally, using shadows to stalk and surprise their prey. Now, humanity possesses something that tears holes in that darkness, something that exposes the hunters and makes them afraid. Scientific studies of animal behavior tell us why fire became such an effective shield. The evolutionary fear of wildfire runs deep in the DNA of most species. Cave lions, despite their massive strength and razor claws, will not cross a line of flame. Hyenas, bold enough to steal kills from adult lions, retreat from even a small fire. Bears, capable of crushing human skulls with a single swipe, turn away when flames dance between them and their intended prey. Our ancestors discovered this power through trial and wonder. Watch as the first fire tender notices how the sounds of night predators change when flames burn bright. The confident hunting calls become distant, hesitant. The scratch of claws on stone fades as creatures that had once boldly tested human defenses retreat into the deeper darkness. Fire doesn't just provide light, it creates a sphere of safety that extends far beyond the reach of the flames themselves. The warmth transformed their bodies in ways they couldn't understand, but could feel in every breath. Their muscles, no longer locked in constant tension against the cold, relaxed for the first time. Blood flowed more freely to their extremities, bringing feeling back to fingers and toes that had been numb for months. Children who had shivered through countless nights now slept deeply, their small bodies finally able to rest instead of fighting the cold that tried to claim them. But fire's greatest gift was not physical, it was psychological. The flames created something our ancestors had never known, a space that belonged entirely to humans. Inside the circle of firelight, they were not prey struggling to survive another night. They became a community, a family, a gathering of minds and hearts united by shared warmth and shared safety. The fire became the center around which human life organized itself, the first permanent feature of human civilization. Evidence from hearth sites across Europe and Africa shows us how our ancestors learned to position their fires for maximum protection. They discovered that flames placed near the cave mouth created a barrier predators couldn't cross while allowing smoke to escape into the night air. They learned that the right arrangement of stones could reflect heat deeper into their shelters, warming sleeping areas that had never known anything but cold stone. The act of maintaining fire became humanity's first shared ritual. Adults took turns feeding the flames through the night, ensuring that the barrier between their families and death never faltered. Children learned their first responsibilities by gathering tinder and small wood. Elders, too weak for hunting or gathering, found new purpose as keepers of flame, guardians of the light that made human life possible. In those flames, our ancestors saw something that spoke to parts of their minds they didn't know existed. Fire was alive in ways they could feel but not explain. It consumed food like a living thing. It grew stronger when fed. It could be injured by water or wind. It breathed. It danced. It reached toward the sky as if trying to escape back to its birthplace among the stars. This was humanity's first partnership with the force of nature, our first step toward becoming something more than just another species struggling to survive. Fire transformed our ancestors from creatures who hid from the night into beings who could push back against darkness itself, who could create safety in a world that had never been safe, who could turn caves of cold stone into hearths of warmth and light. In the dancing flames, our ancestors discovered something that transcended mere survival. They found the first symbol of home, the first promise that darkness could be conquered, the first whisper of what humans might become. The transformation began in their bodies, in systems they couldn't understand but felt with every breath. Modern science reveals what our ancestors experienced instinctively. Firelight triggers the release of oxytocin, the same hormone that bonds mothers to children, that creates trust between individuals, that transforms strangers into families. Around those first hearths, something chemical and profound was happening. The warm light washing over their faces was literally rewiring their brains for cooperation, for love, for the deep trust that human civilization would require. Watch as they arrange themselves around the flames. There is no accident in this positioning, each person finding their place in the circle of light, close enough to feel the warmth but far enough to avoid the sparks. The fire becomes their first architecture, organizing space in ways that speak to something deep in human psychology. Within its glow, they are no longer scattered individuals fighting separate battles for survival. They become a community, unified by shared light, shared warmth, shared safety. The flames work their magic on the human nervous system in ways our ancestors could feel but never explain. The warm, flickering light triggers the release of melatonin at just the right rhythm, synchronizing their body clocks to the dance of flame rather than the harsh cycle of sun and darkness that had governed all life before. Their sleep deepens, becomes more restorative. Dreams come more easily, and with them, the first stirrings of imagination that will eventually create art, music, and the stories that bind cultures together. Children born into this new world of firelight develop differently than their ancestors. Their nervous systems, bathed in the warm glow from birth, show less of the hypervigilance that characterized earlier humans. They laugh more readily, explore more boldly, sleep more soundly. The constant state of alert that had been necessary for survival begins to ease, allowing mental energy to flow toward curiosity, creativity, and the complex social bonds that will define humanity. Evidence from sites like Terra Amata in France shows us how our ancestors began to understand fire as more than just a tool. It became the emotional center of their lives. Hearths positioned with careful attention to wind patterns and smoke flow, rings of stones arranged not just for function but for beauty, the placement of sleeping areas in relationship to the fire's warmth. All of this tells us that fire had become sacred. That light had become the organizing principle of human community. The psychological impact rippled outward from each hearth in waves that would reshape our species forever. Fear, which had been the dominant emotion of human existence, began to compete with something new: confidence. Not the reckless bravery of desperation, but the quiet assurance that comes from knowing safety is possible, that the darkness can be held at bay, that tomorrow's dawn is not just a hope, but a reasonable expectation. Trust flourished in the firelight like a plant finally given proper soil. Family members who had slept in shifts, always alert for danger, began to sleep together, deeply and completely. The person tending the fire could be trusted to keep the flames alive, to maintain the barrier that held death at bay. This trust, this willingness to be vulnerable in the presence of others, became the foundation of all human cooperation that would follow. The flames spoke to something archetypal in human consciousness, something that connected the warm light of the hearth to the distant light of stars, to the life-giving light of the sun, to the mysterious light that seemed to shine from within living things themselves. Fire became humanity's first symbol of the sacred, the first physical manifestation of something that transcended the brutal mechanics of survival. Around these early hearths, our ancestors began to understand that they were different from every other creature that walked the earth. They had captured light itself, tamed it, made it serve their needs. They had created spaces where the weak could be protected, where the young could grow in safety, where the old could share their wisdom instead of being abandoned to die when they could no longer keep pace with the nomadic hunt for food. The circle of firelight became humanity's first sanctuary, the first place on Earth where being human meant something more than simply not being dead yet. In that warm glow, surrounded by faces made golden by dancing flames, our ancestors discovered what it meant to be home. They learned that safety was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of light, warmth, and the faces of those who chose to share both darkness and dawn. This was the beginning of human civilization, not in the grand monuments or complex tools that would come later, but in this simple circle of light that said to every person within its glow, "You belong here, you are safe here, you are not alone in the darkness." In caves across the ancient world, in clearings carved from primordial forests, fire began to speak a language that touched the human soul in ways that reason could never reach. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Our ancestors noticed patterns in the flames that seemed too meaningful to be mere accident. The way certain woods burned with colors that painted the cave walls in shades of blue and green. The way smoke spiraled upward, carrying with it the scents of burning herbs that seemed to calm the mind and ease the spirit. the way embers glowed like tiny stars fallen to earth, pulsing with their own mysterious rhythm. Archaeological evidence from sites like Cavemen Cave in Israel reveals the earliest signs of this transformation. Here, archaeologists have uncovered carefully arranged fire pits that served no practical purpose. They were too small for cooking, too poorly positioned for warmth, too elaborate for simple light. These were ritual fires. Flames tended not for survival, but for something deeper, something that spoke to the growing human need to find meaning beyond mere existence. Watch as the first fire keepers begin to notice how different materials change the character of flame. Pine resin burns with a sweet smoke that seems to induce visions. Certain dried leaves crackle and spark in patterns that appear almost like writing. Animal fat burns steady and bright, while bones create flames that dance with unusual colors. Each discovery adds another verse to the growing scripture of fire, another way that flame can speak to the human heart. The seasonal cycles began to take on new meaning in the light of sacred fires. When the winter solstice arrived, that longest night when darkness seemed to have conquered the world forever, our ancestors learned to build fires larger and brighter than any they had tended before. They couldn't understand the astronomy of what was happening, but they could feel it in their bones. This was the night when light needed their help to survive, when human fire had to stand as a beacon calling the sun home. Evidence from sites across Europe shows us the remains of these solstice fires, great rings of stone surrounding areas where flames once blazed hot enough to change the color of the earth itself. These weren't hearths for warmth or cooking. These were altars where fire became a prayer, where flame became humanity's first offering to the forces that governed the cycles of light and darkness. The sacred nature of fire began to reorganize human society in profound ways. Certain individuals showed particular gifts for understanding flame's moods and mysteries. They could read the future in smoke patterns, could call fire from the smallest ember, could tend flames that burned steadier and brighter than others. These became our first priests, our first shamans, the keepers of humanity's relationship with the sacred power of fire. Children learned their first prayers not in words but in actions. The careful arrangement of kindling, the patient blowing on coals to coax them back to life, the respectful gathering of fuel. Fire became their first teacher about the sacred, showing them that some forces required reverence, that some gifts came with responsibilities, that the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was as thin as flame itself. The ritual calendar began to emerge from fire's rhythms. The lighting of the morning fire became a ceremony of greeting the dawn. The banking of evening coals became a ritual of protecting light through darkness. Special fires marked births and deaths, celebrations and mourning. Fire became the witness to all human passages, the constant presence that connected one generation to the next. In the deepest caves, where no practical fire would ever be needed, archaeologists have found the soot marks of torches and the remains of ritual burns. These sacred fires illuminated humanity's first art, the paintings of animals and spirits that dance across cave walls, brought to life by flickering flame. The fire that lit these ancient galleries wasn't just practical illumination, it was part of the spiritual experience. The way flame made painted animals seem to move and breathe, the way shadows created by torchlight turned static images into living visions. The smoke of sacred fires began to carry prayers upward, connecting earth to sky in spirals of gray and white. Our ancestors, watching these smoky messages disappear into darkness, began to understand that fire was a bridge between worlds, a way for humans to send their hopes and fears to whatever powers governed the movements of sun and stars, the coming of seasons, the success of hunts, the survival of children through harsh winters. Fire temples emerged, not buildings, but places where fire was kept burning continuously, tended by those who understood that some flames were too sacred to ever be allowed to die. These eternal fires became humanity's first churches, places where the sacred could be encountered, where the mystery of existence could be contemplated in the dance of flame against darkness. The worship of fire spread like flame itself, jumping from group to group, generation to generation, until reverence for the sacred flame became one of the defining characteristics of human culture. From the fire altars of ancient Persia to the eternal flames of Greek temples, from the sacred hearths of Roman homes to the candles that burn in churches today, humanity has never forgotten that fire is more than combustion. It is the visible presence of the sacred in the material world. Enter with me into the transformed cave where fire has claimed its rightful place as the beating heart of human life. Here, in spaces carved by water and time, our ancestors discovered the first principle of architecture, that all human space organizes itself around the sacred center of flame. The hearth became more than a source of warmth and light. It became the organizing principle of human civilization itself. The positioning of the fire was never accidental. Archaeological excavations from sites like Terra Amata in France and Bildungsleben in Germany reveal the careful thought our ancestors put into hearth placement. The fire had to be close enough to the cave mouth to draw fresh air for combustion and allow smoke to escape, but far enough inside to be protected from rain and wind. It needed to be positioned where heat would reflect off stone walls to warm the greatest area, where light would illuminate the spaces where humans worked and slept. But the hearth was more than a practical solution to the problems of warmth and light. It became the first piece of human architecture that was designed for the soul as well as the body. Watch as our ancestors arrange stones in careful circles around their fires. These aren't just random rocks gathered for convenience. Each stone is chosen, positioned, adjusted until the circle feels right, until the arrangement pleases something deep in human aesthetic sense that doesn't yet have words for beauty but recognizes it instinctively. The stones themselves tell stories to those who know how to read them. Heat changes rock, turning limestone into calcite, transforming sandstone into harder, more durable materials. The repeated heating and cooling creates patterns and colors that wouldn't exist in nature. Each hearth becomes a unique work of art, shaped by thousands of fires, each flame leaving its signature in the stone that contains it. Smoke management became humanity's first engineering challenge. Our ancestors discovered that fire without proper ventilation could kill as easily as cold or predators. They learned to read the movement of air through their caves, to understand how wind patterns changed with seasons and weather. They began to modify their shelters, creating channels and openings that directed smoke toward natural chimneys in the rock above. Evidence from Cavemen Cave in Israel shows us sophisticated hearth systems dating back 400,000 years. Here, early humans created fire installations that drew fresh air from the cave mouth while channeling smoke toward cracks in the ceiling. The arrangement of stones created updrafts that pulled poisonous gases away from living areas. These weren't accidental discoveries. They represent systematic engineering, the application of observation and intelligence to solve complex problems. The area around the hearth became humanity's first interior design project. Sleeping areas were positioned to take advantage of radiant heat from the stones, which continued to warm the air long after flames had died down. Working areas were arranged to benefit from firelight, allowing for tasks that had been impossible in darkness. Storage spaces were placed where smoke would help preserve food and protect stored goods from insects and small animals. Family life organized itself around the rhythm of the fire. The person who woke first in the morning had the honor of breathing life back into the banked coals, of feeding the first flames of the day. Children learned their earliest responsibilities by gathering tinder and small kindling. Elders, their hunting and gathering days behind them, found purpose as keepers of the flame, guardians of the family's most precious possession. The hearth became the stage where human culture performed its daily dramas. This was where food was prepared, where tools were crafted, where stories were told, where children learned the skills and wisdom they would need to survive. The circle of firelight defined the boundaries of human space, creating the first clear distinction between civilization and wilderness, between the world where humans lived and the darkness where other creatures ruled. Archaeological evidence shows us how hearth design evolved as human understanding of fire deepened. Early hearths were simple depressions in the ground surrounded by rocks. Later ones became sophisticated installations with carefully engineered airflow, designated areas for different types of burning, specialized spaces for cooking versus heating. The hearth became humanity's first complex technology, requiring knowledge passed down through generations, skill developed over lifetimes. The positioning of bodies around the fire reveals the social hierarchies and relationships of these early communities. The closest spots to the warmth went to the most vulnerable: children, elders, the sick. The areas with the best light for working were claimed by those whose skills were most valued. The fire became a mirror reflecting human society, showing who was protected, who was valued, who held authority in the group. The hearth transformed the cave from a temporary shelter into something approaching a home. For the first time in human history, people had a reason to stay in one place for extended periods. The fire created continuity from day to day, season to season. The accumulated ash and charcoal became a record of human presence, a testament to the thousands of meals cooked, the countless nights survived, the generations that had warmed themselves at this same sacred center. Around the hearth, our ancestors began to understand that they were different from every other creature on earth. They had created something that nature had never made, a space designed entirely for human needs, organized according to human intelligence, beautified by human aesthetic sense. The hearth was humanity's first declaration that we would not simply adapt to the world as we found it, but would reshape our environment to serve our vision of how life should be lived. Come sit with me in that first circle of shared light, where our ancestors discovered that fire's greatest gift was not warmth for the body, but warmth for the human spirit. Here, in the dancing glow of carefully tended flames, humanity learned its most essential lesson, that survival was not a solitary struggle, but a shared sacred duty, that the light belonged not to one, but to all who gathered in its embrace. The arrangement around the fire was never random. Archaeological evidence from hearth sites across Africa and Europe reveals the careful social geography our ancestors created in the circle of flame. The strongest adults positioned themselves with their backs to the cave mouth, forming a barrier between the fire and any danger that might approach from the darkness. Children, nestled in the warmest spots, closest to the flames but protected by the bodies of their elders. The elderly, keepers of knowledge and wisdom, claimed places where they could tend the fire and oversee the activities of the community. Feel the texture of those first shared evenings. As daylight fades and the world beyond the cave mouth disappears into darkness, the fire becomes the entire universe for this small band of humans. Its light defines the boundaries of their world. Its warmth becomes the measure of comfort, its crackling voice the soundtrack to their most intimate moments. The flames create a theater where the drama of human life unfolds in shadows and golden light. The act of sharing space around the fire triggered biological changes our ancestors could feel but never understand. Modern research reveals that humans in close physical proximity release increased levels of oxytocin and endorphins, chemicals that create feelings of trust, affection, and social bonding. Around those first hearths, our ancestors were literally becoming more human with each shared evening, their brains rewiring themselves for the complex social cooperation that would define our species. Listen to the sounds of community forming in the firelight, the soft murmur of adults discussing the day's hunt, planning tomorrow's foraging routes, sharing observations about weather patterns and animal behavior, the gentle laughter of children playing games in the warm light, their voices carrying a security that no human child had known before the taming of fire. the rhythmic scraping of stone tools being shaped and sharpened, the crack of nuts being opened, the sizzle of food cooking over the coals. But it was in the stories that humanity truly discovered itself. As the fire burned low and shadows deepened, voices would rise in the darkness, elders sharing memories of great hunts, mothers recounting the wisdom of their own mothers, hunters describing the movements of animals and the secrets of the landscape. These weren't just entertainment to pass the long nights. They were humanity's first libraries, the way knowledge was preserved and transmitted from one generation to the next. The stories grew more elaborate as generations of telling polished them like stones tumbled in a stream. Tales of successful hunts became legends of courage and skill. Memories of harsh winters survived became epic stories of endurance and cooperation. The characteristics of different animals became fables that taught children about the world beyond the firelight. Around the hearth, humanity was creating its first literature, its first philosophy, its first science. Watch as the ritual of shared meals develops around the fire. Food preparation becomes a communal activity, with each person contributing according to their abilities. Children gather wild plants and small creatures. Adults provide meat from the hunt. Elders prepare foods that require skill and experience, roots that must be processed to remove poisons, herbs that add flavor and nutritional value. The fire makes it possible to extract maximum nutrition from available food, allowing communities to support larger numbers of individuals. The cooking fire becomes a laboratory where our ancestors experiment with different combinations of foods, different methods of preparation. They discover that some tough roots become sweet and digestible when roasted in ashes. They learn that certain meats are safer and more flavorful when smoked over specific types of wood. They begin to understand that fire doesn't just heat food, it transforms it, unlocks nutrients, creates new flavors, makes possible a cuisine that will eventually become one of humanity's highest arts. Physical comfort around the fire creates emotional security that had never existed in human experience. For the first time, children can sleep deeply without fear, knowing that adults keep watch and maintain the barrier of light that holds danger at bay. Adults can relax muscles that have been tensed for survival, can turn their attention from constant vigilance to planning, learning, creating. The elderly, instead of being burdens to be abandoned, become valued repositories of wisdom and skill. The fire circle becomes humanity's first classroom. Children learn by watching adults work in the firelight, how to knap stone tools, how to prepare hides, how to read the signs that predict weather changes. They absorb the skills they will need for survival, not through formal instruction, but through the natural process of living and working alongside experienced adults. The extended childhood that will characterize human development begins here, in the safety of the fire circle, where learning can happen slowly, carefully, thoroughly. The shared warmth creates bonds that extend beyond biological relationships. Adults who are not blood relatives begin to care for each other's children. Hunters share meat not just with their own families, but with all who gather around the fire. The elderly are protected and fed not because they are parents, but because they are valuable members of the community. Fire creates humanity's first understanding of society as something larger than kinship, of responsibility that extends beyond genetic relationship. In the gentle light of the evening fire, our ancestors discovered what it means to be home. Not a place, but a circle of faces made golden by flame, a gathering of hearts warmed by more than fire, a community created not by accident of birth but by choice, by the daily decision to share light and warmth and safety through the long darkness of the night. Step deeper into the cave with me, beyond the immediate circle of firelight, where shadows dance their ancient ballet across stone walls. And humanity first discovered that reality was more mysterious than it appeared. In this theater of light and darkness, our ancestors encountered something that would shape human consciousness forever, the birth of imagination itself, born from the marriage of flame and shadow. Watch as firelight flickers across the uneven surface of the cave wall. What begins as simple illumination becomes something magical, almost alive. The natural contours of rock, bumps, depressions, cracks, and ledges catch and hold the dancing light in ways that transform stone into something else entirely. A knob of limestone becomes the rounded shoulder of a massive bison. A crack in the wall transforms into the flowing mane of a running horse. Shadows shift and change with each movement of flame, and suddenly the cave walls are alive with creatures that exist only in the interplay of light and darkness. Our ancestors, exhausted from the day's hunt and warmed by the fire's embrace, found themselves staring at these shadow plays with growing wonder. Their eyes, evolved for tracking movement and recognizing patterns that might mean life or death, couldn't help but see animals in the shifting shapes. But these weren't the predictable, solid animals of the daylight world. These were spirit creatures, beings of light and shadow that appeared and vanished with each flicker of the flame. Archaeological evidence from caves like Lascaux and Altamira reveals how our ancestors began to collaborate with these shadow visions. They noticed that certain natural formations in the rock suggested animal shapes more strongly than others. They began to guide firelight to enhance these illusions, positioning torches and hearths to create the most dramatic shadow displays. The cave wall became humanity's first cinema, where light and darkness collaborated to tell stories that had never been seen before. The psychological impact of these shadow theaters was profound. For the first time in human experience, our ancestors encountered images that moved without being alive, shapes that changed without being real animals. Their brains, evolved to interpret visual information in terms of immediate survival needs, struggled to categorize these phenomena. Were the shadow animals dangerous? Were they spirits of the hunt? Were they messages from some unseen realm beyond the physical world? This confusion between reality and illusion became the birthplace of human spiritual imagination. The shadow creatures seemed to exist in a realm between the physical and the supernatural, between the world of stone and flesh, and some other dimension where different rules applied. Our ancestors began to develop the first concepts of spirit worlds, of realities that could be seen but not touched, experienced but not captured. Children, their minds more flexible than those of adults, showed particular fascination with the shadow plays. They learned to create their own shadow creatures using their hands and bodies, casting the shapes of rabbits and birds and unknown monsters onto the cave walls. This play wasn't just entertainment. It was humanity's first exploration of the boundary between reality and representation, the first understanding that images could carry meaning beyond their physical substance. The shadows began to influence the stories told around the fire. Tales of the day's hunt became enhanced by the shadow creatures dancing on the walls. A story about tracking deer became more vivid when accompanied by the shadow of antlered creatures leaping across the stone. Myths about the spirits of animals began to emerge from these visual experiences, stories that explained why shadow creatures appeared in the firelight and what their presence might mean for the humans who witnessed them. The natural formations of cave walls suggested not just animals but human figures as well, spirits of ancestors perhaps, or representations of the hunters themselves, transformed by firelight into something larger than life. Our ancestors began to see themselves reflected in the shadow play, began to understand that they too were part of this mysterious realm where light created meaning from darkness. The most creative individuals in these early communities began to experiment with enhancing the shadow images. They discovered that charcoal from the fire could be used to darken certain areas of the wall, making the natural animal shapes more pronounced. They learned that red ochre mixed with animal fat could add color that seemed to glow in the firelight. These were humanity's first artists, individuals who understood that the shadow plays could be made permanent, that the spiritual visions could be captured in stone and pigment. Evidence from cave art sites across Europe and Australia shows us how these shadow inspirations evolved into permanent artistic traditions. Many of the earliest cave paintings follow the natural contours of the rock, enhancing shapes that would have been suggested by firelight and shadow. The artists weren't just creating images, they were preserving the spiritual visions that their ancestors had witnessed in the dance of flame and darkness. The shadow theaters became sacred spaces where the boundary between worlds seemed most permeable. Shamans and spiritual leaders learned to use controlled firelight to create specific shadow effects during ceremonies and rituals. The movement of flame could make painted animals seem to run, breathe, and dance. Static images became dynamic spiritual experiences, connecting the human community to the animal spirits they depended on for survival. The myths that grew from these shadow encounters became foundational to human spiritual understanding. Stories of animal spirits that appeared in firelight, of ancestors whose shadows could still be seen on cave walls, of spiritual realms that could be glimpsed in the interplay of light and darkness. These weren't just entertaining stories. They were humanity's first attempts to understand the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds. In the dancing shadows of those ancient caves, our ancestors discovered that perception itself was creative, that the human mind didn't just receive information, but actively participated in creating meaning from sensation. The shadow plays taught them that reality was more complex and mysterious than it appeared, that truth could be found not just in solid things, but in the relationships between light and darkness, presence and absence, the seen and the imagined. Come with me into the deepest part of the night, when the fire burns low and humanity first discovered the strange realm where flame and sleep merge into visions that blur the boundary between waking and dreaming. Here, in the hypnotic glow of dying coals, our ancestors encountered the mysterious landscape of the mind itself, guided by firelight into dreams that would shape human consciousness for millennia to come. The transition from wakefulness to sleep around the ancient hearth was unlike anything we experience in our electrically lit world. As conversations died away and the fire settled into its night rhythm, the quality of light changed from the bright dancing flames of evening to the deep, steady glow of well-banked coals. This dim red light, pulsing gently with each breath of night air through the cave mouth, created a state of consciousness that was neither fully awake nor completely asleep. Modern sleep research reveals what our ancestors experienced instinctively. This twilight state of consciousness, induced by the rhythmic flicker of firelight, triggers the brain's production of theta waves, the same brainwave patterns associated with deep meditation and vivid dreams. The gentle, hypnotic quality of firelight literally altered their consciousness, opening doorways in the mind that harsh daylight kept firmly closed. Watch as our ancestors settle into sleep around the glowing coals. Their eyes, heavy with exhaustion from the day's survival struggles, find themselves drawn again and again to the mesmerizing pulse of the embers. The red glow creates patterns behind their eyelids, flowing rivers of light, swirling galaxies of spark and shadow. Their breathing synchronizes with the gentle rhythm of the fire's breathing, their heartbeats slow to match the pulse of glowing coals. In this state between waking and sleeping, visions began to visit our ancestors with a vividness that seemed more real than reality itself. They saw the animals they had hunted during the day, but transformed, enlarged, imbued with supernatural power and significance. The deer became a spirit guide, leading them through landscapes that existed only in dreams. The bison became a godlike presence offering wisdom about the coming seasons. The wolf transformed from predator to teacher, showing them secrets of survival and community. The fire itself became a presence in their dreams, sometimes appearing as a living creature with its own intelligence and will, sometimes manifesting as a bridge between the world of sleep and the realm of the spirit. They dreamed of following pillars of flame through vast underground caverns, of conversations with beings made of light and heat, of receiving messages written in languages of spark and ember, that they could understand perfectly in the dream state but never remember upon waking. Archaeological evidence from sites like Lascaux and Chauvet caves suggests that many of humanity's earliest artistic visions were inspired by these fire-induced dream states. The fantastic creatures painted on cave walls, animals with multiple heads, beings that are half human and half beast, geometric patterns that seem to flow and dance, bear striking resemblances to the types of imagery reported in altered states of consciousness, induced by rhythmic light stimulation. Children, their developing brains more susceptible to the hypnotic effects of firelight, often experience the most vivid visions. They would fall asleep staring into the coals and wake with stories of magical journeys, encounters with animal spirits, visions of great hunts in realms where the laws of the physical world didn't apply. The adults, initially skeptical, began to pay attention when children's dreams accurately predicted the location of game or warned of approaching weather changes. The boundary between prophetic vision and random dream began to blur in the minds of our ancestors. The firelight dreams seemed to carry information that couldn't be explained by ordinary experience. They dreamed of water sources they had never seen, but later found exactly where their visions had placed them. They saw in their sleep the migration routes of animals that proved accurate in waking life. The fire seemed to be opening their minds to forms of knowledge that transcended the limitations of their physical senses. Certain individuals showed particular gifts for interpreting and remembering the firelight visions. These became humanity's first shamans and seers, people who could navigate the realm between waking and dreaming, who could bring back from their fire-induced journeys practical wisdom for the community's survival. They learned to control their descent into the vision state, to ask specific questions of the fire dreams, and return with useful answers. The ritual use of firelight for inducing visions became formalized in these early communities. Special fires were built with woods and resins that created particular types of light and smoke. Seers would position themselves at precise distances from the flames, allowing the rhythmic flicker to guide them into the trance state where visions became possible. The fire became not just a source of warmth and light, but a gateway to expanded consciousness. The dreams, inspired by firelight, began to influence waking life in profound ways. Our ancestors started to see connections between the dream world and the physical world that changed how they understood reality itself. If spirits could communicate through fire dreams, then fire was more than combustion. It was a form of consciousness. If visions could predict the future, then time was more complex than the simple progression from day to night that governed their daily lives. The practice of dream sharing around the morning fire became a daily ritual. As the community awakened and rekindled the flames for the new day, individuals would recount their night visions, discussing their possible meanings and implications. The elders, experienced in the interpretation of fire dreams, would help younger members understand the symbolic language of their sleeping minds. These shared dream experiences became the foundation of human spiritual and mythological traditions. The recurring symbols and themes that appeared in firelight visions, flying, transformation, communication with animals, journeys to other realms, became the common vocabulary of human spiritual experience. The fire dreams created a shared symbolic language that allowed our ancestors to discuss experiences that had no equivalent in the physical world. The firelight dreams also provided psychological healing in ways our ancestors couldn't understand but deeply felt. The visions allowed them to process the traumas and stresses of their harsh lives in symbolic form, to encounter their fears in a safe, transformed state where they could be mastered rather than merely endured. The fire became humanity's first therapist, providing a natural form of psychological medicine through the healing power of guided visions. Journey with me through the darkest hours before dawn, when the sacred duty of keeping fire alive transformed ordinary humans into the guardians of civilization itself. In those pre-dawn moments, when the night was coldest and darkest, when even the bravest hearts felt the weight of endless darkness pressing down upon them, a single human soul stood between their community and the return of terror. The responsibility was never assigned lightly. Archaeological evidence from hearth sites across the ancient world shows us the care with which our ancestors organized their fire-keeping duties. The night watch rotated among the most trusted members of the community, individuals who had proven their reliability, their ability to stay alert through the long hours when sleep called strongest, their deep understanding of fire's needs and moods. Feel the weight of that responsibility settling on the shoulders of the chosen firekeeper as evening deepens into night. Around the carefully banked coals, the rest of the community settles into sleep, trusting completely that morning will bring them warmth and light and safety. Children curl close to their parents, secure in the knowledge that someone watches over the flame that holds death at bay. Adults sink into the deep sleep that comes only when fear has been conquered, when the ancient terror of darkness has been replaced by the quiet confidence that light will survive until dawn. But for the firekeeper, the night has only just begun. Listen to the sounds that fill the darkness beyond the cave mouth, the distant howl of wolves testing the boundaries of human territory, the scratch of unknown claws on stone, the rustle of night hunters moving through the shadows. Every sound reminds the guardian of flame exactly what their vigil protects against, exactly what would happen if the fire were allowed to die and darkness reclaimed its ancient dominion over human life. The art of maintaining fire through the long night required knowledge that took years to master. The firekeeper had to understand that different stages of the night demanded different approaches to flame management. In the early evening, when the coals were still hot and the night air mild, a light feeding of small twigs and dry grass would keep the flames dancing bright. But as the night deepened and temperatures dropped, the fire required more substantial fuel, larger branches that would burn slowly and steadily, releasing heat gradually through the coldest hours. Watch as the experienced firekeeper reads the subtle signs that tell the story of flame's health. The color of the coals reveals their temperature: deep red for steady burning, orange for flames that need more air, the dangerous purple-gray that warns of a fire beginning to fail. The sound of the fire speaks its needs to those who know how to listen. The gentle whisper of well-fed flames, the sharp crack of wood releasing moisture, the ominous silence that means the fire is beginning to starve. The techniques of fire maintenance became humanity's first sophisticated technology, requiring precise timing and deep understanding of natural processes. The firekeeper learned to bank coals in specific patterns that would maximize heat retention while minimizing fuel consumption. They discovered that certain arrangements of stones could store heat during the active burning phases and release it slowly through the night. They mastered the delicate balance between providing enough air for combustion and protecting the flames from cold drafts that could extinguish them entirely. Evidence from sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel reveals the sophistication of these early fire management systems. Hearths dating back nearly 800,000 years show clear signs of being designed for long-term maintenance rather than simple immediate use. The careful placement of stones, the engineered airflow, the designated areas for different types of fuel. All of this tells us that keeping fire alive was understood as a complex engineering challenge requiring specialized knowledge and skill. The firekeeper developed an almost mystical relationship with flame itself. Through countless nights of watching and tending, they began to understand fire as a living entity with its own personality and needs. They learned to anticipate when the fire would grow hungry for fuel, when it would need the gentle breath of encouragement to coax flames from sullen coals, when it required protection from wind or moisture that could kill it as surely as starvation. The mental discipline required for successful firekeeping was as demanding as the technical knowledge. The guardian had to maintain focus through the long hours when human alertness naturally wanes, when the body's circadian rhythms demanded sleep, when the hypnotic dance of flames threatened to lull consciousness into dangerous relaxation. They developed techniques for staying alert, rhythmic breathing, gentle movement, quiet songs or chants that kept the mind engaged without disturbing the sleeping community. The firekeeper often became the repository of the community's most important knowledge. During the long, quiet hours of night watch, elders would share secrets of flame management that weren't discussed during the busy daylight hours. They learned which woods burned hottest, which materials created the most light, how to read weather signs in the behavior of flames, how to predict when fuel supplies would run low and need replenishment. The spiritual dimension of firekeeping was profound. The guardian of flame became humanity's first priest, maintaining not just a physical fire, but a sacred trust. They understood that they held in their hands the difference between civilization and chaos, between the human world of warmth and light and the prehistoric darkness where terror ruled supreme. The fire was not just combustion, it was the beating heart of human community, and its guardian was the keeper of life itself. The techniques for banking fires and preserving coals through periods of low activity became trade secrets passed down through generations. Master firekeepers taught their apprentices how to arrange fuel and coals so that fires could survive for hours with minimal attention, how to create backup ember caches that could restart dead fires, how to transport living coals safely when the community needed to move to new locations. The tools of fire maintenance evolved alongside the knowledge of flame management. Special implements for moving coals without burning the handler, containers made from animal hides or hollowed gourds for storing ember-starting materials, even primitive bellows made from animal bladders that could provide controlled airflow to encourage reluctant flames. The psychological burden of firekeeping was intense but transformative. The individual who successfully maintained fire through the night experienced a profound sense of accomplishment and spiritual connection. They had stood alone against the darkness and won, had preserved the light that made human civilization possible, had earned the deep gratitude and respect of their entire community. In the growing light of dawn, when the firekeeper finally passed their sacred duty to another and settled into well-deserved rest, they carried with them the knowledge that they had participated in something larger than individual survival. They had served as guardians of humanity's most precious possession, keepers of the flame that separated human beings from all other creatures on earth, protectors of the light that would one day illuminate the entire world. Walk with me across the harsh landscape of the Ice Age, where our ancestors faced a challenge that would test their ingenuity and reshape their understanding of the natural world. In this frozen realm, where trees were scarce as summer warmth, where traditional fuel was a precious commodity rarer than meat itself, humanity learned that survival required not just courage and community, but innovation that could transform the most unlikely materials into sources of life-saving fire. The problem was immediate and desperate. Archaeologists studying Ice Age environments tell us that vast regions of Europe and Asia were treeless tundra, swept by winds that prevented the growth of anything larger than low shrubs and hardy grasses. The great forests that would later cover these lands existed only as tiny refugia in the most protected valleys. For communities that had learned to depend on fire for survival, the scarcity of wood presented a crisis that threatened their very existence. But necessity, as always, became the mother of invention. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mezherik in Ukraine reveals the stunning creativity our ancestors brought to solving the fuel problem. Here, in structures dating back 15,000 years, archaeologists have uncovered hearths that burned not wood, but the bones of mammoths, massive creatures whose skeletons provided fuel that could burn for days, heating entire communities through the harshest winter weather. Picture the moment of that first desperate experiment. Imagine a firekeeper watching the last precious piece of wood being consumed by flames, knowing that dawn is still hours away, that the cold will kill without warmth, that the community depends entirely on their ability to keep the fire alive. In that moment of crisis, someone looks at the massive leg bone left over from the evening meal and wonders, could bone burn like wood? The discovery that bone could serve as fuel opened an entirely new world of possibilities. But bone fire was different from wood fire. It required different techniques, different understanding, different skills. Bone burns hotter than wood, but ignites more slowly. It produces less smoke, but requires better airflow. Most importantly, different types of bone burn differently. The dense bones of large animals like mammoth and rhinoceros burn slowly and steadily, while the hollow bones of birds ignite quickly but burn fast. Our ancestors became experts in bone fuel management, learning to prepare skeletal remains for optimal burning. They discovered that bones burned better when they were cracked open to expose the marrow, that weathered bones ignited more easily than fresh ones, that certain arrangements of bone fragments created airflow patterns that sustained combustion for maximum duration. But bone was not the only alternative fuel our resourceful ancestors discovered. In regions where even large animal bones were scarce, they learned to burn other materials that the natural world provided. Animal fat, carefully rendered and stored, could be burned in simple stone lamps that provided both light and heat. The technique required innovation. Fat burns differently than wood or bone, producing more smoke and requiring different kinds of containers and wicks. Archaeological sites across northern Europe reveal evidence of these fat-burning lamps, shallow stone bowls with channels carved to hold twisted plant fiber wicks, blackened with the soot of countless nights of burning. These weren't just emergency measures, but sophisticated technologies that allowed human communities to survive in environments where traditional fires would have been impossible to maintain. Tree resin became another crucial fuel source, particularly valuable because it burned with an exceptionally bright flame and aromatic smoke that seemed to have beneficial effects on health and mood. Our ancestors learned to identify the trees that produced the most useful resins, to harvest these materials at the optimal times, to store them properly for long-term use. Pine resin burned with a light that was almost like sunlight, lifting spirits during the darkest months of winter. The innovation extended to mixed fuel combinations that burned better than any single material alone. Experienced firekeepers learned to combine bone and wood, fat and resin in proportions that created optimal heat, light, and duration. They discovered that certain mixtures produced smoke with insect-repelling properties, that others created flames hot enough for specialized tool-making or food preparation. Evidence from Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic shows us how sophisticated these fuel technologies became. Here, archaeologists have found hearths designed specifically for burning mixed fuels, with carefully engineered airflow systems that could accommodate the different combustion requirements of wood, bone, and fat burning simultaneously. These weren't simple campfires, but complex fuel-burning installations that represent genuine technological achievement. The scarcity of traditional fuel forced our ancestors to become keen observers of their environment, constantly searching for new sources of burnable materials. They learned to identify which plants dried into useful tinder, which animal products could supplement scarce wood supplies, which geological formations might yield coal or other mineral fuels. Every walk through the landscape became a fuel-gathering expedition. Every hunt a chance to collect bone for the fire as well as meat for the table. Storage and preparation of alternative fuels became a crucial survival skill. Unlike wood, which could often be burned fresh, many alternative fuels required processing before they could be used effectively. Bones had to be cleaned, dried, and often broken into optimal sizes. Fat needed to be rendered and purified. Resins had to be collected, cleaned of bark and debris, and stored in ways that prevented them from hardening into unusable lumps. The community aspects of fuel gathering and preparation became as important as the technical knowledge. Different individuals specialized in different aspects of the fuel economy. Some became expert bone processors, others mastered the art of resin collection, still others developed skills in fat rendering and lamp making. The fire that warmed the community became a truly cooperative creation, requiring the contributions of many hands and many types of expertise. The psychological impact of mastering alternative fuel sources was profound. Communities that had learned to create fire from bones and fat and resin were no longer at the mercy of scarce wood supplies. They had achieved a form of energy independence that allowed them to survive in environments that would have been impossible for earlier humans. They had transformed from creatures who used fire to creatures who could create fire from almost anything the world offered. The knowledge of alternative fuels became precious cultural information passed down through generations, with the same care given to the most important survival skills. Children learned to identify useful resins as carefully as they learned to track animals. Young adults practiced bone preparation with the same dedication they brought to tool making. The mastery of diverse fuel sources became one of the defining characteristics that separated successful communities from those that failed to adapt to harsh environments. In learning to burn more than wood, our ancestors discovered something profound about their relationship with the natural world. They were not just users of the environment, but active partners in a complex relationship where human ingenuity could unlock energy and warmth from the most unlikely sources. The fire that warmed them was no longer just a gift from nature, but a creation of human intelligence, adaptability, and determination to survive against all odds. Come with me on humanity's first great migration, where fire became not just the heart of home, but a traveling companion that made the impossible journey possible. Watch as our ancestors faced their greatest challenge yet: how to carry the sacred flame across vast distances, through rivers and storms and territories where no fuel existed, preserving the spark that meant the difference between life and death in unknown lands. The problem was both simple and profound. Fire had transformed human life so completely that communities could no longer survive without it. But fire, by its very nature, was tied to place, to the hearthstones that contained it, to the fuel supplies that fed it, to the shelter that protected it from wind and weather. How could nomadic bands carry this essential but fragile element across the harsh landscapes of the Ice Age world? Archaeological evidence from migration routes across Eurasia tells us the story through scattered traces of portable fire technology. In caves from Spain to Siberia, archaeologists have found the remains of specially designed fire-carrying containers. Hollow horn cups lined with clay, tightly woven baskets sealed with animal fat, even skulls of large animals modified to serve as ember vessels. Each represents a solution to the seemingly impossible challenge of making fire portable. Picture the scene as a community prepares to abandon a winter camp and move to new hunting grounds. The fire that has warmed them through the cold months cannot be left behind, cannot be easily recreated at their destination. Everything depends on successfully transporting living embers across distances that might take days or weeks to traverse. The firekeepers work with focused intensity, preparing for a journey that will test both their technical skill and their nerve. The art of ember preservation required knowledge that took generations to perfect. Master firekeepers learned that different materials could keep coals alive for different amounts of time. Charcoal, made from dense hardwoods, could maintain heat for many hours when properly insulated. Punk wood, partially decayed timber that smoldered rather than flamed, could stay alive for days if protected from air and moisture. The key was finding the right balance between materials that would burn slowly enough to last the journey, but reliably enough to restart full fires when needed. Watch as they prepare the traveling fire containers. Dry moss and grass create insulating layers around carefully selected coals. Animal hide wrappings protect against moisture while allowing just enough air circulation to keep the embers breathing. Clay-lined containers resist the heat while protecting the precious cargo from external damage. Every detail matters. too much insulation, and the coals die from lack of oxygen, too little, and they burn too quickly or get extinguished by weather. The psychological burden of carrying fire was immense. The individual entrusted with the traveling flames held the life of the entire community in their hands. If the fire died during the journey, the group faced potential disaster in unknown territory. Children might freeze before new fire could be made. The band might become vulnerable to predators in the darkness. The fire carrier walked with the knowledge that a single mistake, a moment of carelessness, could doom everyone who traveled with them. Evidence from sites along ancient migration routes shows us how communities organized themselves around fire transport. Special roles emerged. Individuals who specialized in selecting and preparing the traveling coals, scouts who identified the best routes for fire protection, guards who protected the fire carrier from physical dangers that could jeopardize their precious cargo. The entire group's movement became synchronized with the needs of keeping fire alive. The technical challenges were formidable. Rivers had to be crossed without allowing water to reach the fire containers. Storms required special shelters and protections. High winds demanded careful positioning and extra insulation. Communities developed ingenious solutions. Waterproof containers made from treated animal bladders, windscreens woven from plant fibers, backup fire carriers who traveled separately to reduce the risk of total fire loss. But carrying fire also opened up possibilities that had never existed before. With portable flame, communities could venture into territories where no natural fire sources existed, could establish camps in locations that would have been impossible without the ability to create immediate warmth and light. The portable fire became humanity's first energy technology, freeing our ancestors from dependence on specific locations and allowing true nomadic flexibility. The spiritual dimension of fire transport was profound. The traveling flame became a symbol of continuity, a physical connection between past and future homes, a tangible representation of the community's survival through change and uncertainty. Fire ceremonies developed around the departure from old camps and the arrival at new ones, rituals that honored the flame's role in making the journey possible and blessed the new hearth that would be established at the destination. Children learned the sacred duty of fire protection as their first serious responsibility. They helped gather the insulating materials, assisted in preparing backup ember supplies, practiced carrying fire containers over short distances. The skills required for fire transport became part of the essential education every young person needed to become a contributing member of the community. The innovation in portable fire technology drove broader advances in human tool making and material science. Creating effective fire containers required understanding of clay working, leather treatment, fiber weaving, and thermal management. The needs of fire transport pushed our ancestors to develop new techniques in craftsmanship that would later find applications in many other areas of technology. The success of fire transport missions became legendary within communities. Individuals who successfully carried fire across particularly difficult journeys were celebrated as heroes whose skills had made survival possible. These fire carriers became repositories of specialized knowledge about weather patterns, travel routes, fuel identification, and emergency fire-making techniques that didn't depend on transported embers. The psychological confidence that came with mastering fire transport was transformative. Communities that could reliably carry fire wherever they traveled were no longer bound to specific territories or dependent on natural fire sources. They had achieved true mobility, the ability to survive and thrive in any environment where basic food and water could be found. They had transformed from creatures adapted to specific habitats into truly planetary species capable of thriving anywhere on Earth. The portable fire became humanity's first step toward technological independence from environmental limitations. In learning to carry the sun in their hands, our ancestors discovered that human ingenuity could overcome even the most fundamental constraints of nature. The flame that traveled with them was more than fire. It was proof that intelligence and determination could triumph over any obstacle. could carry life and warmth and hope into the darkest and coldest corners of the world. Journey with me to the sacred moments when fire transcended its role as mere survival tool and became humanity's first altar, the focal point of ceremonies that connected our ancestors to the eternal rhythms of earth and sky. Here, in clearings carved from ancient forests and on hilltops that caught the first light of dawn, fire became the language through which humans first spoke to the cosmos itself. The transformation began with the recognition of patterns larger than daily survival. Our ancestors, their lives no longer consumed entirely by the immediate needs of finding food and staying warm, began to notice the great cycles that governed their world: the lengthening and shortening of days, the return of migrating herds, the blooming and dying of plants. All of these followed rhythms that seemed to echo something profound and mysterious about the nature of existence itself. Archaeological evidence from sites like Newgrange in Ireland and Stonehenge in England reveals how our ancestors began to mark these cosmic rhythms with fire ceremonies that required planning and cooperation on scales never before seen in human society. These weren't simple campfires expanded for practical purposes. They were massive installations designed specifically for ritual use, fires so large and complex that they required the coordinated effort of entire communities to create and maintain. Picture the winter solstice in a Paleolithic community, that longest night when darkness seemed to have claimed permanent victory over light. Our ancestors felt the psychological weight of this moment more intensely than we can imagine. Without artificial lighting, without the certainty of electric switches, the solstice truly felt like the moment when the world might tip permanently toward eternal darkness. In response, they created fire ceremonies of unprecedented scale and beauty. Watch as the community gathers materials for the solstice fire weeks in advance. This is not just fuel gathering, but a sacred quest. Special woods are selected for their burning properties: oak for its steady, long-lasting flame, pine for its bright, uplifting light, aromatic herbs that will carry prayers upward with their smoke. Each piece of fuel is chosen not just for practical reasons, but for its symbolic significance, its connection to the spiritual meaning of the ceremony. The construction of the ritual fire becomes a community art form. Stones are arranged in patterns that echo the movements of stars and seasons. Wood is stacked in configurations that will create maximum light and heat, but also maximum beauty. Spirals that mirror the galaxy, crosses that mark the cardinal directions, circles that represent the eternal cycle of seasons and generations. As darkness falls on the longest night, the entire community gathers around the unlit pyre. The moment of ignition is sacred, often reserved for the eldest member of the group or the most skilled firekeeper. But this is not just a practical lighting of fuel. It is humanity's first conscious attempt to influence cosmic forces, to add human fire to the struggle between light and darkness that governs all existence. The flames that leap from the solstice pyre are unlike any ordinary fire. Fed by carefully selected fuels and tended by the hopes and fears of an entire community, they blaze with an intensity that seems to push back the very boundaries of night. The light reaches farther than practical fires ever need to, creating a beacon that can be seen across vast distances, a human star that announces to the cosmos that intelligence and will have joined the eternal battle between light and darkness. Evidence from ritual sites across Europe and Asia shows us how these ceremonial fires evolved into complex spiritual technologies. Fire altars carved into living rock, designed to focus and amplify flame. Stone circles that create natural amphitheaters around central fire pits. Elevated platforms that lift ritual fires closer to the stars they seem to communicate with. These installations represent sophisticated understanding of fire's spiritual as well as practical properties. The smoke from ceremonial fires carries special significance in ways our ancestors felt intuitively. Different materials create different qualities of smoke, some rising in straight columns that seem to connect earth and sky, others spreading in patterns that mirror the movement of clouds or the flow of water. The fire tenders learn to read these smoke patterns as messages, signs of how successfully their ceremonies are connecting with the cosmic forces they seek to influence. The community aspects of ritual fire ceremonies transform social relationships in profound ways. Creating and maintaining ceremonial fires requires cooperation beyond anything needed for survival fires. Individuals must subordinate their immediate personal needs to the demands of the ceremony. They must work together with perfect timing and coordination. The success of the ritual depends not on individual skill, but on community harmony and shared commitment. Children experience these ceremonial fires differently than adults, their developing minds more open to the spiritual dimensions of the experience. They see in the great blazes connections to the stories they've heard around smaller fires, visions of the cosmic battles between light and darkness that the ceremonies seem to make visible and immediate. For them, the ritual fires become formative experiences that shape their understanding of humanity's place in the larger universe. The timing of ceremonial fires becomes increasingly sophisticated as communities develop deeper understanding of astronomical cycles. Fires are lit at the exact moments of solstice and equinox, timed to welcome the return of migrating animals, synchronized with the phases of the moon. This requires observation and record-keeping that represents some of humanity's earliest scientific activity, the careful tracking of cosmic rhythms for purposes that transcend immediate practical needs. The aftermath of ceremonial fires creates sacred spaces that retain spiritual significance long after the flames have died. The ashes from ritual fires are treated as holy substances, scattered on fields to ensure good harvests, mixed with clay for pottery that will hold special significance, preserved as relics that connect future ceremonies to past successes. Special roles emerge within communities based on skills related to ceremonial fire. Individuals who show particular gifts for reading smoke patterns, for timing rituals to cosmic events, for creating fires that burn with unusual beauty or intensity. These become humanity's first specialized priests and priestesses, people whose primary role is not survival, but the maintenance of spiritual connections between human communities and cosmic forces. The psychological effects of participating in large ceremonial fires are profound and lasting. The shared experience of creating something beautiful and meaningful together, of successfully conducting complex rituals that seem to influence forces beyond human control, creates bonds between participants that transcend ordinary social relationships. The community that has celebrated the solstice together, that has joined their individual flames into a great fire that speaks to the cosmos itself, becomes something more than a survival group. It becomes a spiritual family, united by shared connection to the sacred. In the great ceremonial fires of our ancestors, we see the birth of organized religion, the first conscious human attempts to participate in cosmic processes rather than simply survive them. The flames that blazed on sacred nights were more than combustion. They were humanity's first prayers made visible, our first offerings to the mysterious forces that govern existence, our first declarations that intelligence and consciousness deserve a voice in the great cosmic conversation. Come close to the intimate circle where fire first taught humanity to read the subtle languages of emotion, where flame became not just light and warmth, but a translator of feelings too deep for words. Here, in the gentle glow of evening fires, our ancestors discovered that their relationship with flame was changing their very capacity for love, trust, and the complex emotional bonds that would define human society forever. The transformation happened at levels our ancestors could feel but never fully understand. Modern neuroscience reveals the chemical reality of what they experienced around their fires. The warm, flickering light triggered the release of oxytocin, the same hormone that bonds mothers to newborn children, that creates the deep trust between mates, that transforms strangers into family. Around the ancient hearths, Fire was literally rewiring human brains for the complex emotional relationships that civilization would require. Watch as a family settles around their evening fire. The day's struggles for survival finally ended, the immediate demands of hunger and safety temporarily satisfied. In this sacred pause between the urgencies of day and night, something magical begins to happen. The warm light washing over their faces doesn't just illuminate their features. It seems to reveal something deeper, more essential, about who they are beneath the hard shell that survival has required them to build. The children feel it first, their developing nervous systems most sensitive to the emotional changes that firelight induces. The hypervigilance that characterizes all young animals in dangerous environments begins to ease in the fire's glow. Their muscles relax, their breathing deepens. Their eyes lose the quick, darting alertness that constant danger requires. For perhaps the first time in their short lives, they feel truly safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally secure in ways that will reshape their developing personalities forever. Parents notice the change in their children and feel their own hearts responding. The biological mechanisms that evolution has designed to keep families together in crisis begin to transform in fire's presence. The stress hormones that maintain constant alertness in dangerous environments give way to the neurochemicals of bonding and affection. Mothers find themselves reaching out to touch their children, not to check for injury or provide protection, but simply from an overflow of love that the firelight seems to have unlocked. Archaeological evidence from family hearth sites across the ancient world shows us the physical traces of these emotional transformations. The careful placement of sleeping areas to maximize shared warmth, the arrangement of workspaces so that family members can see each other's faces in the firelight, the positioning of food preparation areas to encourage conversation and cooperation. All of this tells us that our ancestors intuitively understood fire's role in creating emotional intimacy. The fire becomes a silent counselor, its presence somehow making difficult emotions easier to express and process. Adults who have learned to suppress fear and vulnerability for the sake of survival find themselves able to share their deepest concerns in the fire's warm light. The dancing flames seem to provide a safe space for emotional honesty, a neutral presence that witnesses without judgment, that accepts all feelings without criticism or advice. The rhythm of shared breathing around the fire creates subtle but profound connections between family members. Modern research on group synchronization shows us what our ancestors felt instinctively. When people breathe together, their nervous systems begin to synchronize, their heart rates align, their brain waves start to match. Around the ancient hearths, families were literally becoming more connected at the physiological level, their bodies learning to move together in harmony. The emotional language that emerges in firelight is more subtle and complex than anything our ancestors had experienced before. A gentle touch becomes more meaningful when shared in the warm glow. A worried glance carries deeper significance when illuminated by dancing flames. Children learn to read their parents' emotions not just through obvious expressions of fear or anger, but through the subtle play of firelight across faces that reveals worry, hope, love, determination. The fire teaches families about emotional regulation in ways that transform human psychological development. The steady, calming presence of well-tended flames provides a model for emotional stability that children unconsciously absorb. They learn that feelings like fires can be tended and managed, that emotional storms can be weathered through patient attention, that the warmth of family connection can be maintained through consistent care and feeding. Trust deepens around the fire in ways that reshape human social evolution. The person who tends the flame through the night demonstrates commitment to the family's welfare that goes beyond mere survival cooperation. They are protecting not just physical safety, but the emotional sanctuary that firelight creates. This level of trust, the willingness to be emotionally vulnerable while another person guards both physical and psychological well-being, represents a new level of human social development. The fire circle becomes humanity's first therapy session, the place where emotional wounds can be acknowledged and begin to heal. Adults who have survived traumas that would break modern minds find ways to process their experiences in the accepting presence of flame and family. The fire seems to create a sacred space where pain can be shared without overwhelming others, where strength can be rebuilt through the simple act of being witnessed and accepted. Children raised around fires develop emotional capabilities that their ancestors never possessed. They learn empathy not as a survival strategy, but as a natural response to the increased emotional sensitivity that firelight nurtures. They discover that happiness shared is happiness multiplied, that sorrow shared becomes manageable. The fire teaches them their first lessons about love as something more than reproductive strategy or survival alliance. The seasonal cycles of fire maintenance create rhythms of emotional intimacy that stabilize family relationships. The shared work of gathering fuel, the cooperative effort of maintaining flames, the division of fire-tending duties, all of this creates patterns of mutual dependence and care that strengthen emotional bonds. Families learn that love is not just a feeling, but a practice, a daily choice to tend the flames that keep relationships alive. The fire's role in marking significant emotional events becomes formalized in early ritual practices. Special fires for births that welcome new members into the emotional community. Mourning fires that help process grief and loss. Celebration fires that amplify joy and create lasting positive memories. The flame becomes the witness and participant in all the major emotional passages of human life. The warmth that radiates from the fire becomes a metaphor that our ancestors begin to understand intuitively. That emotional warmth, like physical heat, can be shared, can be generated through care and attention, can be lost through neglect, but rekindled through patient effort. The fire teaches them that love is not a finite resource, but a renewable energy that grows stronger when properly tended. In the gentle glow of their hearths, our ancestors discovered that they were becoming something new, not just intelligent animals who had learned to use tools and control fire, but emotional beings capable of love that transcended survival needs. The fire that warmed their bodies was also warming their hearts, teaching them the emotional languages that would make civilization not just possible, but beautiful. Enter with me into the deepest mystery of ancient nights, where fire transformed not just the waking hours, but revolutionized the very landscape of human sleep and dreams. Here, in the warm embrace of carefully tended flames, our ancestors discovered that fire could heal not just the body, but the mind itself, creating the first safe harbor for the vulnerable voyage into sleep that every human must take each night. Before fire, sleep was humanity's most dangerous necessity. Archaeological evidence from pre-fire sites shows sleeping arrangements that speak of constant vigilance, bodies positioned for quick escape, sleeping areas chosen for defensive advantages rather than comfort, the shallow, interrupted rest of creatures who knew that unconsciousness might mean death. Sleep was not rest, but merely another form of survival challenge, a nightly gamble with forces that ruled the darkness. But fire changed everything about how humans could approach the vulnerable state of sleep. Watch as a family settles for the night around their glowing hearth, the transformation visible in every aspect of their behavior. For the first time in human evolutionary history, they can arrange themselves for comfort rather than defense. Children can sleep deeply rather than maintaining the light vigilance that had characterized all young mammals in dangerous environments. The warmth radiating from banked coals creates a cocoon of comfort that signals to human nervous systems that safety is real and sleep can be deep. Modern sleep research reveals what our ancestors felt intuitively. Warmth triggers the release of melatonin, the hormone that regulates healthy sleep cycles. The steady heat from well-maintained fires helped reset their biological clocks, creating the deep, restorative sleep that allowed human brains to grow larger and more complex. Listen to the sounds of the fire-protected sleep camp. Instead of the scattered, alert breathing of creatures ready to wake and flee at the first sign of danger, there are the deep, rhythmic respirations of genuinely restful sleep, children's soft sighs of contentment, adults' steady breathing, the gentle snores of elders who can finally relax muscles that had been tensed for survival for decades. The fire has created humanity's first sound of peace. The light from dying coals creates a visual environment that promotes healthy sleep in ways our ancestors couldn't understand but deeply felt. The warm, red glow doesn't disrupt melatonin production the way bright light does, but provides just enough illumination to prevent the complete darkness that triggers primitive panic responses. It's the perfect compromise between light and dark, creating conditions that allow the human brain to rest without triggering the ancient fears associated with total blackness. Archaeological evidence from ancient hearth sites shows us how our ancestors learned to engineer their sleeping environments around fire's needs and gifts. Sleeping areas positioned to receive optimal radiant heat without being close enough to flames to pose fire danger. Stone configurations that stored heat during active burning and released it slowly through the night. Carefully planned ventilation that provided fresh air while protecting sleeping areas from cold drafts. The social arrangements around fire-protected sleep reveal profound changes in human relationships. For the first time, families could sleep in close physical contact without the spacing required for quick escape from danger. Parents and children could share warmth and comfort, creating the intimate family bonds that had been impossible when sleep was a survival challenge rather than a time of rest and restoration. The fire's role as guardian during sleep created humanity's first experience of trust in something beyond immediate family groups. The person who maintained the night fire was trusted with the lives of sleepers who were completely vulnerable. This level of trust in non-family members represented a revolutionary expansion of human social cooperation, making possible the larger groups and complex societies that would characterize human civilization. The quality of sleep around protected fires improved dramatically, with effects that rippled through every aspect of human development. Deep sleep allows the brain to process experiences, consolidate memories, and form the neural connections that support learning and creativity. Children sleeping safely by fires could dedicate mental energy to growth and development rather than vigilance and survival. Adults could wake refreshed rather than exhausted by a night of interrupted rest. Dreams flourished in the fire-protected sleep environment in ways that had never been possible before. The security provided by guarded flames allowed human minds to wander safely through the landscape of sleep, exploring the creative and problem-solving capabilities that only emerge during deep rest. The fire became humanity's first gateway to the unconscious mind, the protector of the mental realm where imagination and insight could develop. The fire's hypnotic qualities created transitional states between waking and sleeping that enhanced both rest and dreams. The gentle, rhythmic flicker of dying flames induced the alpha brainwave states associated with creativity and spiritual experience. Our ancestors fell asleep not to the harsh transition from wakefulness to unconsciousness that characterizes modern sleep, but to a gentle progression through altered states of consciousness that prepared the mind for deeper rest. Evidence from cave sites across Europe and Asia shows how fire-protected sleep areas became specialized environments designed for optimal rest. Soft materials, furs, dried grasses, carefully prepared plant fibers, arranged to maximize comfort. Sleeping surfaces positioned to take advantage of reflected heat from stone walls. Even primitive pillows and mattresses that show our ancestors understood that good sleep required more than just safety. It required comfort. The seasonal rhythms of fire maintenance created sleep patterns that synchronized with natural cycles in healthy ways. During long winter nights, carefully banked fires allowed for extended sleep that helped communities survive the psychological challenges of months of darkness. Summer fires, smaller and more carefully managed, provided just enough security to allow rest without overheating sleeping areas. The fire's role in regulating community sleep schedules created the first shared human circadian rhythms. Instead of individual sleep patterns determined by personal safety needs, communities began to sleep and wake together, synchronized by the rhythms of fire maintenance and the shared security that group fire watching provided. This synchronization strengthened social bonds and made possible the coordinated activities that complex human societies required. Children born into fire-protected environments developed sleep patterns that differed fundamentally from their ancestors. They learned to associate sleep with safety rather than vulnerability, rest rather than vigilance. Their developing brains could dedicate the energy typically reserved for survival to growth, learning, and the development of capabilities that had never before been possible in human evolution. The morning awakening around banked fires became humanity's first experience of waking refreshed, rather than immediately alert for danger. The gentle warmth of coals that had provided protection through the night created a comfortable transition back to wakefulness. Adults woke with energy for activities beyond immediate survival needs. Children woke ready to learn and explore rather than simply endure another day of challenges. The fire that guarded sleep became a symbol of the transformation that was reshaping human existence. No longer were humans creatures who barely survived the night. They had become beings who could rest safely, dream deeply, and wake ready to build rather than simply endure. The flames that watched over their sleep were watching over the birth of a new kind of consciousness, a new form of life that would reshape the world. Step into the deepest chambers of ancient caves where flickering torchlight first revealed the miracle of human artistic vision, where fire became not just humanity's protector, but its first art teacher. Here, in galleries carved by time itself, our ancestors discovered that flame could transform blank stone walls into canvases that would preserve their visions for tens of thousands of years. The discovery was as accidental as it was revolutionary. Picture a torch-bearing hunter pursuing wounded prey into the depths of a limestone cave, the flames casting wild shadows across walls that had never known light. In the dancing illumination, natural formations in the rock suddenly revealed themselves as almost animals. A bulge in the stone that suggested a horse's shoulder, a crack that followed the curve of a mammoth's trunk, shadows that seemed to breathe with life. But it was when the hunter held the torch steady that the real miracle occurred. The constant light revealed that the stone animals weren't moving at all. They were trapped in the rock, waiting for human hands to set them free. Archaeological evidence from caves like Lascaux and Altamira shows us the soot marks on walls and ceilings where our ancestors first held torches steady, studying the rock formations with the intensity of people seeing something that would change everything they understood about the relationship between imagination and reality. The first pigments were there in the cave itself, waiting to be discovered. Iron oxide deposits stained the rock in shades of red and brown. Manganese created blacks and purples. Charcoal from the torches provided the deepest blacks. Clay gave whites and yellows. Our ancestors realized they could mix these materials with animal fat, spit, even their own blood, to create paints that would adhere to stone and remain visible in firelight. Watch as the first artist, perhaps a skilled tracker whose eyes were trained to see animal shapes in natural formations, begins to enhance what the rock already suggested. Using fingertips and primitive brushes made from animal hair, they follow the natural contours of stone, adding lines that transform suggestion into clear representation. A few strokes of red ochre, and suddenly a stone bulge becomes unmistakably the shoulder of a bison. A line of charcoal creates the flowing mane of a horse caught in mid-gallop. But the real magic happened when firelight animated these static images. The flickering flames made painted animals seem to move, to breathe, to come alive in ways that still astonish viewers today. The artist learned to use this effect deliberately, positioning images to take maximum advantage of the animation that firelight provided. A horse painted across a natural curve in the wall would seem to gallop, when viewed by torchlight. A bison's head would appear to turn and look at the viewer as flames danced and shifted. Evidence from cave art sites across Europe and Asia reveals the sophisticated understanding our ancestors developed of fire's role in artistic creation. Torch holders carved into cave walls show where lights were positioned for optimal artistic work. Soot patterns on ceilings reveal how artists learned to manage smoke to avoid obscuring their work while maintaining the illumination they needed. Special niches for storing pigments and tools show that these caves became dedicated artistic workshops where generations of artists refined their craft. The choice of subjects wasn't accidental. The animals painted in firelit caves were the creatures that dominated our ancestors' waking lives. The prey they hunted, the predators they feared, the fellow travelers who shared their landscape. But in the cave galleries, these animals were transformed from daily challenges into spiritual presences, elevated to mythic status through the alchemy of art and firelight. The painting process itself became a ritual activity that connected artists to the animals they depicted. Working by firelight, surrounded by the dancing shadows of their own creations, artists entered altered states of consciousness where the boundary between painter and painted seemed to dissolve. They weren't just creating representations of animals, they were participating in some deeper communion with the animal spirits that governed their world. The technical challenges of cave painting pushed human creativity in ways that would reshape consciousness itself. Artists had to plan their work around the limitations of firelight, the way shadows fell, the areas of wall that could be illuminated simultaneously, the need to work quickly before torch fuel was exhausted. These constraints forced innovations in artistic technique and composition that wouldn't be seen again until Renaissance masters began to explore similar challenges. Children learned their first lessons about art and imagination in these firelit galleries. Brought into the caves by adult artists, they saw how human hands could collaborate with natural stone formations to create images that seemed more real than reality itself. They learned that humans possessed a power that no other creature had, the ability to create persistent images, to make permanent the fleeting visions that filled their minds. The social aspects of cave painting created humanity's first art school. Knowledge of pigment preparation, brush making, composition, and the effective use of firelight was passed down through generations of artists. Master painters taught apprentices not just technical skills, but the spiritual dimensions of artistic creation, how to enter the trance states that connected them to animal spirits, how to read the stone for the creatures waiting to be revealed. The caves became pilgrimage sites where people traveled to witness the miraculous collaboration between human creativity and fire-animated art. The images weren't just decorations, but spiritual technologies that connected viewers to the animal powers that governed survival and success in hunting. Ceremonies developed around the viewing of cave art, rituals that used firelight to bring painted animals to life for spiritual purposes. The preservation of cave paintings through tens of thousands of years speaks to our ancestors' understanding of permanence and legacy. They weren't just creating art for immediate enjoyment, but were consciously crafting messages for future generations. The images that danced in ancient firelight continue to move and breathe when illuminated today, connecting us directly to the minds and spirits of people who lived when humanity was just beginning to understand its creative potential. The psychological impact of creating and viewing fire-animated art was profound. Our ancestors discovered that they could externalize their inner visions, make permanent the images that filled their dreams and imagination. The cave walls became the first human interface between internal and external reality, the first place where mind could speak directly to mind across generations and centuries. The discovery that pigments mixed with fat and spit would adhere to stone led to experimentation with other surfaces and techniques. Evidence shows that cave artists began to decorate objects, bodies, and temporary surfaces with the same materials and methods developed for cave painting. Fire had taught humanity not just to see art, but to create it everywhere. transforming the human environment from purely functional to aesthetically meaningful. In the flickering light of ancient torches, our ancestors discovered something that would separate humans from all other creatures forever. They learned that consciousness could create beauty for its own sake, that intelligence could be used not just for survival, but for the pure joy of making something that had never existed before. The fire that illuminated their first paintings was lighting the way toward all the art, music, literature, and creative expression that would define human civilization. The deepest chambers where torch smoke mingles with incense and human breath, fire became humanity's first guide to the realm of spirit and vision. The transformation began with the recognition that certain fires produced more than light and heat. They generated experiences that touched something profound in human consciousness. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites across the ancient world reveals special fire installations designed not for practical purposes, but for their effects on human perception and spiritual awareness. Stone circles positioned to focus firelight in specific ways, burning chambers where particular combinations of fuels created smoke that induced altered states of consciousness. Watch as the first shamans, individuals who showed unusual sensitivity to fire's consciousness-altering properties, begin to experiment with different materials and techniques. They discover that certain resins, when burned in enclosed spaces, create smoke that seems to open doorways in the mind. Pine resin produces visions of soaring flight. Sage creates clarity and spiritual cleansing. The bark of specific trees generates experiences of communication with animal spirits. The caves that housed these vision fires were chosen with care that reveals deep understanding of psychology and acoustics. Sites like the Chauvet Cave in France show evidence of ritual fires in chambers where natural acoustics amplify sound, where smoke would accumulate in specific patterns, where the interplay of firelight and stone formations created optimal conditions for inducing visionary experiences. Picture the scene as a young person undergoes their first vision quest in one of these sacred fire chambers. The specially prepared fire burns with flames that seem to dance with unusual intensity, casting shadows that move independently of the flickering light. The smoke, heavy with aromatic resins, creates a haze that softens the boundaries between light and darkness, between the solid world of stone and the fluid realm of spirit. As the fire burns and the vision seeker breathes the sacred smoke, consciousness begins to shift in ways that feel both terrifying and wonderful. The cave walls seem to breathe and pulse with life. The painted animals begin to move more dramatically than simple firelight animation could explain. Sounds become visible as flowing patterns of light. The boundary between self and environment starts to dissolve in experiences that feel more real than ordinary waking consciousness. The spiritual technologies our ancestors developed around vision fires were sophisticated and subtle. Master shamans learned to control every aspect of the experience, the types of fuel that would produce specific effects, the breathing techniques that enhance the fire's consciousness-altering properties, the ritual preparations that opened minds safely to visionary experiences. This wasn't random experimentation, but systematic exploration of human consciousness using fire as the primary tool. Evidence from vision sites shows the careful attention paid to creating optimal conditions for spiritual experiences. Ventilation systems that allowed precise control of smoke concentration. Seating arrangements that positioned vision seekers at specific distances and angles from the fire. Even acoustic engineering that used the natural reverb of cave chambers to enhance the auditory dimensions of visionary experiences. The visions that emerged from these fire-induced altered states weren't random hallucinations, but meaningful experiences that provided practical guidance for community survival. Vision seekers saw the locations of game animals with accuracy that couldn't be explained by ordinary knowledge. They received warnings about weather changes, guidance about seasonal timing, insights into the healing properties of plants and minerals. The fire seemed to connect human consciousness to forms of information that transcended normal sensory input. Children showed particular sensitivity to the consciousness-altering effects of vision fires, their developing brains more open to the non-ordinary states that fire and smoke could induce. Under careful supervision by experienced adults, young people were introduced to visionary experiences as part of their education in the spiritual dimensions of existence. They learned that reality was more complex and mysterious than it appeared in ordinary consciousness. The social role of vision fires created humanity's first specialized religious practitioners, individuals who showed particular gifts for navigating altered states of consciousness, for interpreting visions in useful ways, for guiding others safely through spiritual experiences. These shamans became bridges between ordinary and non-ordinary reality, translators of messages received in vision states back into practical guidance for daily life. The integration of vision experiences into community life required sophisticated understanding of human psychology. The shamans learned that visions needed to be carefully interpreted and integrated to be useful rather than disruptive. They developed techniques for helping vision seekers understand their experiences in ways that enhanced rather than undermined their ability to function in ordinary reality. The fire ceremonies that induced visions became formal rituals with complex protocols and safeguards. Participants underwent preparation that might include fasting, purification rituals, and mental training designed to create optimal conditions for receiving meaningful visions. The ceremonies themselves were carefully orchestrated to provide maximum spiritual benefit while minimizing psychological risk. The mythology that grew from vision fire experiences became the foundation of human spiritual understanding. Stories of journeys to other worlds, communication with animal spirits, encounters with supernatural beings. These weren't just entertaining tales, but attempts to preserve and transmit the knowledge gained in altered states of consciousness. The vision fires had revealed that reality was far more complex and interconnected than ordinary perception suggested. The therapeutic dimensions of vision fires provided psychological healing in ways that our ancestors felt intuitively. The altered states induced by fire and smoke allowed people to process traumas and fears in symbolic form, to encounter and integrate aspects of their psyche that remained hidden in ordinary consciousness. The fires became tools for mental health and emotional balance as well as spiritual development. The artistic inspiration that flowed from vision experiences can be seen in the sophisticated symbolism of cave art and early religious objects. The geometric patterns, the fantastic creatures, the complex symbolic systems that appear in ancient art often bear striking resemblances to imagery reported in fire-induced altered states. The vision fires were teaching our ancestors a symbolic language that would influence human creativity for millennia. The seasonal timing of vision fire ceremonies reveals understanding of natural cycles and their effects on human consciousness. Major vision quests were often timed to coincide with solstices and equinoxes, with changes in weather patterns, with the migration of animals. Our ancestors understood that the effectiveness of vision work was influenced by cosmic cycles that affected both human consciousness and the broader environment. The legacy of vision fires can be traced through thousands of years of human spiritual development. From the mystery schools of ancient Greece to the vision quests of Native American traditions, from the meditation practices of Eastern religions to the contemplative traditions of Christianity and Islam, humanity has never lost the understanding that fire can be used to induce experiences that reveal hidden dimensions of reality. In the sacred darkness of ancient caves, surrounded by the consciousness-altering smoke of vision fires, our ancestors discovered that human awareness could transcend the limitations of ordinary perception. They learned that fire was more than a physical phenomenon. It was a gateway to expanded consciousness, a teacher that could reveal truths about the nature of existence that couldn't be accessed through reason alone. The flames that guided their visions were illuminating pathways to understanding that would shape human spiritual development forever. Come with me into the sacred heart of human community, where certain souls emerged from the darkness to carry a responsibility that would define civilization itself. Here, among the flickering shadows of ancient hearths, we witness the birth of humanity's first sacred calling, the keeper of fire, whose steady hands and wakeful eyes stood between their people and the return of primordial terror. The role did not choose itself randomly from among the community members. Archaeological evidence from hearth sites across the ancient world reveals the careful selection process our ancestors developed for identifying those worthy of this ultimate trust. The firekeeper had to possess not just technical knowledge, but spiritual qualities that marked them as different from their fellows. Patience that could endure the longest nights, perception that could read flame's subtlest moods, and above all, the profound sense of responsibility that understood fire as more than combustion. Watch as the community observes its members during the daily rituals of fire maintenance, searching for signs of the special gifts that mark a true guardian of flame. Some individuals show natural affinity for reading the language of ember and coal, understanding instinctively when flames need feeding, when they require more air, when they must be banked for the long hours of night. Others demonstrate the psychological steadiness required for night watches that could stretch from sunset to dawn without wavering attention or failing vigilance. The training of a firekeeper began in childhood, with promising young people selected for apprenticeship to master flame guardians. These weren't casual lessons, but intensive education in humanity's most crucial survival skill. Apprentices learned to identify dozens of different materials by their burning characteristics. Which woods produced steady, long-lasting heat, which dried grasses made the best tinder, how different animal fats burned in emergency situations when traditional fuel was scarce. But technical knowledge was only the beginning. The true firekeeper had to develop what we might now call a meditative relationship with flame itself. Archaeological sites reveal evidence of prolonged fire-watching sessions, areas where keepers spent hours in contemplation of flame behavior, learning to perceive patterns and rhythms that escaped casual observation. They discovered that fire was not random, but followed deep laws that could be learned and anticipated by those with the patience and dedication to study them. The spiritual dimensions of firekeeping transformed it from mere craft into sacred calling. Evidence from ritual sites shows us that firekeepers underwent formal initiation ceremonies, rites of passage that marked their transition from ordinary community members to guardians of the flame that made human life possible. These ceremonies recognized that firekeepers were accepting responsibility not just for maintaining combustion, but for preserving the light that separated humanity from the darkness of pure animal existence. The psychological profile of successful firekeepers reveals remarkable consistency across cultures and centuries. They tended to be individuals who found peace in solitude, who could maintain focus during long periods of apparent inactivity, who possessed the emotional stability required to bear ultimate responsibility for community survival. The firekeeper's vigil was not just about staying awake, it was about maintaining the mental alertness and spiritual centeredness that allowed them to respond instantly to any threat to the flame they guarded. The tools of the firekeeper evolved into specialized implements that reveal the sophistication of their craft. Archaeological sites yield carefully crafted implements for manipulating coals, containers designed for specific types of fuel, even primitive measuring devices for timing fuel additions during long night watches. Each tool was designed not just for function, but for the precise control that firekeeping demanded. The ability to make subtle adjustments without disturbing sleeping community members or creating dangerous sparks. The social status of firekeepers reflected the crucial importance of their role. Evidence from burial sites shows that master fire guardians were interred with honor accorded to no other profession, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the symbols of their sacred calling. They were not just skilled workers, but spiritual leaders whose mastery of flame qualified them to guide community decisions about seasonal migrations, resource allocation, and the timing of important ceremonies. The knowledge system that fire keepers developed represents humanity's first systematic science. They created the earliest weather prediction methods, reading atmospheric conditions through fire behavior. They developed the first calendars, tracking seasonal changes through the burning characteristics of different materials. They pioneered the metallurgy that would eventually transform human technology, learning which stones changed color and properties when heated to specific temperatures. The emotional burden of fire keeping created a unique psychology that shaped these individuals in profound ways. The constant awareness that others' lives depended on their vigilance, the knowledge that a single moment of inattention could bring disaster to their entire community. This responsibility forged personalities of unusual strength and selflessness. Firekeepers learned to find fulfillment not in personal achievement, but in the quiet satisfaction of successful service to something larger than themselves. The teaching traditions that grew around firekeeping ensured that this crucial knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. Master keepers developed elaborate training programs, systems of apprenticeship that could span decades, ceremonial passing of knowledge that transformed firekeeping from individual skill into cultural institution. The flames they guarded were not just physical fires, but the burning heart of human civilization itself. The seasonal rhythms of firekeeping created deep connections between guardians and the natural world. They became expert observers of cosmic cycles, reading in the behavior of flames the subtle changes that mark transitions between seasons, the approach of weather systems, the movements of animals that followed predictable patterns throughout the year. The fire revealed to them secrets of the natural world that were invisible to casual observers. The spiritual practices that developed around firekeeping transformed these individuals into humanity's first contemplatives. The long hours of flame watching became meditation, periods of deep communion with forces that transcended ordinary material existence. Firekeepers developed the first systematic approaches to altered states of consciousness, learning to use the hypnotic properties of flame to access insights and intuitions that guided their communities through challenges and changes. The legacy of the firekeepers echoes through all subsequent human civilization, from the Vestal Virgins of Rome, who maintained the sacred flame of the city, to the eternal flames that burn in modern monuments, from the lighthouse keepers who guided ships safely to harbor, to the engineers who maintain the power grids that light our cities. Humanity has never forgotten that civilization depends on those willing to guard the flame that makes our lives possible. In the steady hands and watchful eyes of our ancestors' firekeepers, we see the birth of human dedication to something greater than individual survival. They were the first humans to choose service over self-interest, responsibility over comfort, the welfare of the community over personal ease. The flames they guarded were more than fire. They were the light of human consciousness itself, carefully tended and lovingly preserved through the long darkness, until dawn brought the promise of another day of warmth and light and hope. Journey with me now to the end of our ancient story, where the small flames that first danced in primordial caves have grown into the blazing lights of human civilization itself. Here, at the threshold between the world of our fire-keeping ancestors and our own age of electric abundance, we witness the magnificent transformation that began when frightened humans first reached toward the gift of flame and changed the destiny of our entire planet. The caves that sheltered our ancestors through the endless Ice Age nights have long since emptied, but the fires they kindled have never been extinguished. Each flame that burns today carries within its dancing heart the genetic memory of those first carefully tended hearths. the unbroken chain of combustion that connects the banker of ancient coals to the engineer monitoring nuclear reactors, the child learning to strike flint to the scientist splitting atoms to release the fire that burns within matter itself. Watch as the descendants of those first fire keepers emerge from their stone shelters into a world transformed by the mastery they have achieved. The techniques learned through countless generations of flame tending have evolved into technologies that reshape the earth itself. The knowledge of different burning materials has become metallurgy, extracting copper and tin and iron from stones that seemed solid and lifeless to earlier eyes. The understanding of controlled heat has become pottery, creating vessels that can hold more than water. They can hold the dreams and artistic visions of minds no longer consumed by mere survival. The communities that once huddled around single hearths have grown into settlements, then towns, then cities whose lights can be seen from space. The cooperative fire tending that taught our ancestors to trust each other through the vulnerable hours of sleep has evolved into the complex social contracts that make civilization possible. The authority of the firekeeper has become the authority of leaders who understand that their primary responsibility is protecting and nurturing the flame of human possibility. Archaeological evidence from the transition sites between Paleolithic and Neolithic periods reveals how the mastery of fire enabled the agricultural revolution that made permanent settlements possible. The controlled burns that cleared forests for planting, the kilns that baked pottery for storing grain, the forges that created the tools for tilling soil, all of these technologies grew from the fundamental understanding of fire's power that our ancestors developed during those long nights of vigilant flame watching. But the transformation goes deeper than technology. The psychological changes that began around those first hearths have reshaped human consciousness itself. The trust learned in fire-protected sleep became the foundation of complex societies where millions of strangers can cooperate without ever meeting face to face. The emotional warmth discovered in shared firelight has become the capacity for love and empathy that extends beyond biological relationships to encompass the entire human family. The stories told around ancient fires have become the literature, philosophy, and science that define human culture. The visions seen in flame-induced altered states have evolved into art, music, and spiritual traditions that elevate human existence beyond mere material survival. The calendar keeping that began with observations of fire behavior has become the mathematical and scientific traditions that unlock the secrets of stars and atoms alike. Picture the moment when the first human city lights up at nightfall. Thousands of individual flames creating a constellation of human making that rivals the stars themselves. The children who sleep safely in that city's glow, protected not by a single hearth, but by the collective fire-keeping of an entire civilization, dream dreams that their cave-dwelling ancestors could never have imagined. They dream of flight, of journeys to other worlds, of technologies that harness the fundamental forces of nature itself. The Industrial Revolution that transformed human society was essentially a revolution in fire technology, the harnessing of coal, oil, and gas to create steam, electricity, and the mechanical power that drives modern civilization. The firekeepers of the machine age tended furnaces and boilers instead of wood fires, but their role remained fundamentally the same. Guardians of the flame that makes human civilization possible. The atomic age revealed that fire existed not just in combustion, but in the very structure of matter itself. The fusion fires that burn in stars, the fission that splits uranium atoms, the electromagnetic radiation that carries energy across the universe. Humanity had learned to kindle fires that burned without fuel, to capture and control the same forces that light the sun and power the cosmos. The electronic age has transformed fire into pure information. Electrons flowing through circuits, light pulsing through fiber optic cables, electromagnetic fields carrying human voices and images around the globe at the speed of light. The fire that once provided only warmth and illumination now carries human consciousness itself, connecting minds across continents in networks that function like a global nervous system. The environmental challenges of our modern world force us to remember the lessons our ancestors learned about fire's dual nature as creator and destroyer. The same combustion that enabled human civilization now threatens the climate systems that make Earth habitable. We must learn, as our fire-keeping ancestors did, that the power to create fire carries with it the responsibility to tend it wisely, to use it in service of life rather than destruction. The space age has carried human fire beyond Earth itself, rocket engines burning with controlled explosions that lift us toward the stars. On Mars and the Moon, in space stations orbiting Earth, human-tended flames burn in the vacuum of space, carrying the light of consciousness to worlds that have known only darkness. The fire that once barely survived the night in ancient caves now burns in the cosmic darkness between worlds. The genetic memory of our fire-keeping ancestors lives on in every human born today. The comfort we feel around candles and fireplaces, the way firelight still synchronizes our breathing and calms our minds, the deep satisfaction we derive from tending flames, all of these responses were encoded in our DNA during those ancient nights when fire meant the difference between life and death. The future that extends before us carries the promise of fires beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. Fusion reactors that will burn clean and endless, mimicking the fires of stars. Solar collectors that will harvest the fire of the sun itself. Perhaps even the discovery of forms of controlled combustion that exist only in the quantum realm. Fires that burn in dimensions we are only beginning to understand. But whatever technologies the future brings, they will all trace their lineage back to those first tentative human hands that reached toward flame in ancient caves. Every light that illuminates human darkness, every fire that warms human hearts, every spark of creativity that ignites human imagination, all of these are descendants of the sacred flame that our ancestors first learned to kindle and tend. The children who will inherit the future world of light and energy and possibility carry within their cells the DNA of firekeepers, the genetic heritage of those who chose to guard the flame rather than fear it. They will face challenges their ancestors never imagined, but they will meet those challenges with the same courage and creativity that first tamed fire and transformed it from destroyer into creator. In the end, the story of fire is the story of human consciousness itself, the long journey from creatures who cowered in darkness to beings who carry light to the stars. The flames that dance in our modern world are not separate from those that flickered in ancient caves, but continuous with them, part of an unbroken chain of firekeeping that connects our past to our future, our primitive origins to our cosmic destiny. The fire that our ancestors discovered in darkness has become the light that guides us toward a future bright with possibility. Every flame we kindle honors their memory and continues their sacred work, the eternal human task of keeping the light alive through whatever darkness may come, preserving the spark of consciousness that makes us uniquely human, ensuring that the fire of human spirit will never be extinguished as long as our species endures.